Welcome to Mining Now, everyone. I'm your host, Jared Downey. We are filming Paterson and Cooke from SME, I don't know why I'm looking at the notes, SME Mine Exchange in Denver, Colorado. We've got 3 guests on, so it's almost going to be like a panel discussion style. And we've got their director, Todd Wisdom, on. We've got Rachel Jansen, tailings and group manager. Am I doing okay so far? And Kathy Adams, right? Mineral processing manager and a fellow Canadian.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Okay. We're going to cover quite a bit of ground. You guys are going to be kind of jumping in on these different topics here. But I wanted to, Todd, I did want to start with you just to, for anybody who doesn't know the company, give that introduction to Paterson and Cooke.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jared. So Paterson Cooke is a privately owned company. It was started in 1991 by Dr. Angus Paterson and Dr. Robert Cooke. And they were really looking for an interesting job that they could then make profitable. They wanted to have fun and make some money.
So we started this company.
Yeah, right. Then you're doing a good job too, right?
Yeah. You got to enjoy it.
Exactly. So they started that in 1991, and now, 24 years later, we're over 250 people. We're in 8 countries with 9 offices. We have over 70 people that are professional engineers. And we service the complete globe from those 8 different countries that we're.
What do you think the reason is for that type of growth?
You know, it really comes down to the people. Both Angus and Robert are outstanding individuals, right? They're the founders of the company and very smart, very good with clients. They really know their background and their technology. And they started working in pipelines and slurry systems. That was what they got their PhDs in. And so they started working with that and developing systems to pump slurries around the world, different locations, different industries. And they started with that, and then they grew upwards from that, meaning so they knew how to do the slurry pipeline, so then they started doing some tailing systems, and upstream of that is the mineral processing systems. And then as kind of adjacent to that is another way to do tailings, which goes backfill. It's called backfill. It goes underground. So they grew the company kind of stepwise from what they knew. And they've continued to hire outstanding individuals, outstanding people that know their technologies, they know their processes. And it's just continued that tradition of very high quality people that are knowledgeable. They've got great experience, and they've got a lot of passion about doing something right for the client.
Before we get into the show, I think we should do a little more of an introduction to everybody. So we're going to let's start with Kathy. What is your sort of day-to-day overarching role with the company?
Yeah, so Todd mentioned, the company getting started in slurry transport and backfill. And as we've grown upstream into the concentrator, that's kind of where my role has come in. So I manage the mineral processing group in North America. And so working on developing our team in that area. So focused on everything upstream of tailings.
And Rachel?
Yeah, so I work in our tailings group, mainly surface tailings. So, traditionally, most tailings are stored as a slurry in a conventional tailings dam facility. And that's where Paterson and Cooke was working in tailings as those pipeline designs to get the material to the TSF. But, as the industry has started to recognize that we need to do better with our water stewardship, need to do better with the volume of tailings that we're producing and storing, there's been a lot of interest and growth in tailings dewatering technologies. So this is removing as much water as you can economically and then storing the material. So our group specializes in doing the test work, the analysis, design, and then building those plants for our clients.
I was curious, that maybe all three of your perspective, if you'd like, is how much of the technology and the design that's introduced is from your company's innovation, or from the client saying, we have a vision of what we want this to look like? I'm sure it's sort of a marriage of both those things, but what's your perspective on how it's sort of the innovation, what drives the innovation?
I would actually add another piece to that. There's vendors that have technology that they bring into the mix. And so what our specialty and what we do really well is we take what the client wants and what they need, together with technologies that vendors have and our own in-house experience and innovation, and then tie everything together to give the client something that really gives them an optimum solution, right? You can't just look at one piece of the puzzle. You've got to look at it on a holistic approach. I don't know. What do you think of that, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. Working with the vendors with their existing technology, but we also work with them reviewing and helping guiding some of their blue sky developments. We're involved. Todd and I are involved in. It's called the Tailings Management Consortium, and it's being sponsored by BHP and Rio Tinto. Super exciting initiative. It's two major mining companies collaborating on developing new technologies that are not already at market. So that's
Right.
and so we're really fortunate to be involved with that. It's super interesting.
Very exciting. Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you before we jump into some of the other topics. You have a test facility. I think it was in. I was looking at it. I think it's in Cape Town. It's a laboratory.
So we have labs in almost all of our offices now. Some have different capabilities.
Oh, okay.
The two largest labs that we have are in Cape Town. That was the original home office, right?
Oh, that was the original one.
So
Okay.
they have the probably the biggest lab there. But we also have very large labs in Sudbury in Canada and here in Denver, Colorado also.
Okay. So what does that consist of, the laboratory?
So it's we're able to do rheology testing, which allows us to do sizing and technology development around pumping and pipeline systems. We do dewatering testing, which allows us, as Rachel was talking about, for designing either thickeners or filters for a particular solution for a client. And then we also have some mineral processing capabilities around flotation and et cetera that we use for mineral processing that allows us to look at those unit operations.
We're going to jump into. We're going to do a little bit more. But Kathy, I just wanted to kind of, because we're talking about dewatering and tailings, but that really, the mineral processing, which is your specialty, has really been pulled into that discussion more so over the years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. As Rachel mentioned, like her team really is focusing on helping clients address these more stringent regulations and rules that are getting implemented around tailings. And so, naturally, tailings only come from one place, and that's a concentrator. And so as these concentrators are adapting, in planning for the future, they're also having to consider tailings. And so I think, you mentioned what kind of drives technology. And I think these emerging technologies are just driven through the needs that clients are experiencing, both on the tailings end, but also in the concentrator. Some of these new flotation technologies and things we see more and more requests for in projects and things that are getting implemented in these existing mine sites to try and plan for the future. They've got ore types that are changing. They've got tonnages that are increasing, and trying to address those things. And even for our company, we have these lab facilities that you mentioned where we conduct test work, but also just in our projects, in working with our clients and seeing what kind of struggles that they're experiencing. We have developed technologies within our company also as well. We do have some subsidiary companies that have developed as a result of a lot of the work that we're doing. So, with the focus in tailings and dewatering, we've got a group focused around examining existing thickeners and helping them overcome the challenges of increased throughput. So you have a lot of thickeners already struggling with current operations and getting them up and running. So we've developed some technologies that are proprietary to us in the process of that. And then we've got some similar things for backfill, helping people monitor the underground backfill systems, software development for that, and helps people save money on all the costs that are associated with backfill. So cement addition in a backfill plant is your highest operating cost. So helping clients monitor and control that. And then Aranzu in South Africa too, just helping develop components for sites.
Yeah, you actually right. I was going to ask you about subsidiaries or even other companies like OEMs that you're working with, whatever, that network effect of what you're trying, the people that you collaborate with on these projects.
So the one subsidiary that Kathy failed to mention, thoughtfully disregarded, because it's called backfill. It's called backfilling. We do actually.
It's all in the name.
Yeah, we do contractual deposition of backfill material for mines. So it's a service. It's not really a technology, although there is some technology around the trucks that allow us to put the material underground and mix it with cement and other additives so that you can make the backfill recipes.
What about your communication with the manufacturers? Is that a direct communication, or is that sort of like you're just seeing their technology availability and then integrating into your planning?
It's some of both. So, I mean, they have their own R&D programs, and they develop new technologies and new products that need to be implemented into the wider market. They do ask us for pointers and directions and what do we think and what do the other miners think in terms of where technology should go or what they should work on. And vendors can be very good about developing certain pieces of technology, the actual equipment itself. But where they struggle is how do you tie it all together? And that's one of our fortes. How do we do that? A good example of that is coarse particle flotation. It's one of the new flotation technologies that Kathleen mentioned. It produces a very coarse tailing stream, and you think that's a great thing. It dewaters quickly, it's easy. But the transport of it is become the real issue. It's very difficult to pump because it's so coarse. Are you going to dewater it and transport it by truck or conveyor? How do you deposit it out at the TSF? Because it dewaters so readily, you actually have to place it where you want it to go. So there's a lot of challenges around how do you have the whole solution, not just one piece of kit.
Okay, we're going to circle back to that. I saw you nodding along to a couple of them out of the corner of my eye. It's my job. So do you have anything to add to that?
I think, we do collaborate a lot with the OEMs, but we also have had a pretty good opportunity to work with some of the universities as well. And I really love that we're tying that all together. So mainly under that tailings management consortium umbrella of BHP and Rio Tinto's, we've got different sort of early technology developers. We've got university professors helping us assess some of that technology. We've got other consulting firms working with us. And yeah, it's just a really good collaboration. Everyone's starting to share more information, whereas traditionally I don't think we were very good at doing that. So.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give a shout out also to SME here because I'm seeing multiple universities, and I've been to other events. There'll be, I'll see the students with their backpacks going around, but I'm actually seeing quite large groups. So it's great to see them getting people involved, like young people involved, which is a big challenge, of course, in the industry. Rachel, we've touched on it a little bit, but where do you see the technology going? Sort of as all this technology is coming into the industry and developing, we've got all this sensor technology and everything that's coming in. Where do you sort of see the next stages going when it comes to tailings specifically?
So I have seen a more openness to looking at alternative tailings management solutions. I think mining companies are really trying to do the best that they can in terms of water recovery and stable facilities that they're constructing. There's a whole gambit of options out there. It doesn't just have to be filtered tailings. Filtered tailings is sort of the buzzword. Everyone thinks that's the ultimate goal or the prize in terms of tailings management, but you can do a lot of really great things just with high density or paste thickened tailings. There's a lot of work looking at mixing waste rock with tailings. So there's that geostable consortium that's working on that. So I think that people have sort of taken the blinkers off and saying, okay, there's a whole range of options. Like, what is the best option for my particular application? One thing we've seen too is that when I first got into the tailings industry, paste tailings was sort of a big thing that everyone was super excited about. And then it sort of became it quieted down because there were a couple of operations that didn't go off as well as they had hoped. And that was mainly due to the paste thickeners were not producing the material that was predicted from laboratory scale. They were having a scale-up issue in performance and many other reasons as well. But I think now that the industry has really ironed out all of those kinks and we have reached a point where we're saying, okay, we can use paste thickeners, but we don't have to produce true paste. We don't need to go to 100 Pascal material. We can use paste thickeners to produce high-density tailings, which is easier for us to transport, easier for us to place, and you're still getting a benefit of all that water recovery.
Something that came to my mind is I've done a lot of interviews, and people will say that the mining industry, it's very conservative and, not quick to adopt technology. But then I hear what you just said, two major projects that they put in that system, and it doesn't work. That is a major expense for a company. Is that the hurdle of trying? Now it's almost like if you go to order at a restaurant and there's like 50 things on the menu, you're kind of like, oh, okay, just tell me what your two bests are. That's what I'm here for. The industry now with all this technology and all these options, though, that becomes almost a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to invest millions of dollars. So how do they sort of, and I'm sure that's where you step in, but how do you sort of walk them through that all these options, especially when you've got different systems that have failed in different applications, but failed for different reasons, been successful, but maybe not successful at their operation. How do you sort of manage that, even the communication of that?
Yeah, I've seen some of our clients really trying to push to do a pilot or demonstration plant first before jumping 100% into a system. For example, Todd recently was in Peru visiting one of the it is the largest pressure filter installation. The filter itself is the largest in the world. And the idea there was that they wanted to trial this technology, work with the vendor to iron out all their kinks, work out what the true operating cost is of this trial technology, and then they could make a decision after that point whether to invest and go 100% filtered tailings for that system.
Yeah, and that's just now that process that they followed, is that something that could be duplicated in other mines? Is that the way to do it?
So
Sometimes.
yeah,
Sometimes that's the right answer.
I mean, there's going to be a ton of learning
Yeah.
from these trial plants, but certainly every single site is different, and there's going to be nuances.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of these topics. The more you get into it, the more questions that get created.
For a miner, it's all about managing risk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't look in the ground and understand exactly where your ore body is, and so there's risk with that. There's risk in how do you process the ore when it comes out? How do you actually get the valuable metal that you want? And then there's the risk now more on the tailings side. It used to be in tailings when you just did a slurry deposition, you just kind of pumped it and forgot about it and didn't that was one thing you didn't need to worry about. Now when you start doing higher performing technologies like paste thickening and high density thickening, and especially filtration technologies, they're much more sensitive to changes and much more sensitive to mineralogies and particle size distributions. So now there's suddenly a risk there that they haven't had to deal with before. And I think managing those risks and coming up with a global optimum solution. What's the right particle size distribution and processing that you're going to do? Maybe your recovery's a little bit less, but you're saving money in your tailing system, but still doing a filtration technology. And as a whole, that's a better solution than doing something else.
Well, that's perfect tee up for, okay, so Kathy, how do you manage the communication on this end? Because get into the tailing section, but now there's so much at stake. And I kind of what I'm hearing too is that as the tailings technology develops, there's sort of a domino effect, and now that has to move up into the processing.
Yeah,
part.
exactly. And that's kind of how Paterson and Cooke's presence in the concentrator kind of came about, is just that drive and need for people to operating these facilities and designing these facilities to have an understanding of the impacts in tailings. And so, you know, if Rachel tells me that, you know, I need this PSD and I need this percent, you know, solids come into my filter, like I can't go changing things in my mill that are gonna impact her ability to filter. And so I think people more and more are realizing, you know, you've got your grade you got to hit, and you know there's kind of not a lot of wiggle room there sometimes, but you know you do have to also be thinking of tailings as a product coming out of your plant. It's not just a garbage stream that kind of disappears in this area where you forget about it and don't think about it. No, you really do have to do it, and a lot of the time, you know, what's required on that end is driving what's happening in the plant.
So, okay, Paterson and Cooke wouldn't necessarily always be on the mineral processing side and on the tailing side, right? So that must get a little bit tricky sometimes if you're not managing the design of both, right?
It is, and it's surprising a lot, even at operating mine sites, those groups can be operating pretty independently. You know, you got a whole tailings team that understands all the struggles that they experience on the daily and the long-term plan for the facility and the different raises that they're expecting, that is completely independent to what's happening in the concentrator. And so we do get involved in projects, and it is surprising a lot how much separation there is there. And even in design projects, you know, prior to coming to Paterson and Cooke, you know, coming out my flow sheet was a battery limit that said by others when it became the tailings stream. And so it, you know, you do often have, even from the design side, a lot of the time that is an independent part of the project. But I think what we see, and like one of the values that we can bring, is like an understanding of what that whole picture needs to look like, because they are not independent, and tailings, come from a concentrator that they're not two independent systems where you can just think that one can function without worrying about what the other is doing.
Yeah, have you felt success in the industry, sort of putting out that message and bringing in those clients to sort of unify those two things?
Yeah, I think people are coming around. I think, look, Rachel's probably seen within her team and the discussions, even with some of the big clients she mentioned, people are spending a lot more time thinking about tailings than I think they used to. And so, but it still has a ways to come. Your plant is operating and running every day, depending on how much gold you might be producing.
Right.
And that's what's driving.
Yeah.
The operation is there to make a product.
And as a service provider, you need to appreciate that is where the mine is coming from, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see our clients also thinking about tailings and how they're going to manage their tailings at the mine planning stage. We worked on a really cool project a couple of years ago where they were taking drill core samples to develop their geometallurgical model for their Greenfields project. And we were able to take some of that drill core sample and do dewatering index testing. So we were able to map out not just the crushing, grinding, recovery of that ore body, we were able to map out the dewatering filtration performance of the material. And then they can take that information and incorporate it into their mine plan.
Are there maybe some projects that sort of maybe tie everything we're talking about new technology, integration of the mineral processing with the tailings? Maybe Kathy, start with you. Is there any project that stands out to you that goes, that's a good example of how it all ties in?
Yeah, I think so. We've got a few projects right now, and we're seeing more and more requests for this type of work is reprocessing of tailings. And so a lot of the time that can be driven by sites having to deal with old historic tailings dams, and you're already thinking about moving the material maybe from one point to another. Let's look and see what value there might be in those historic facilities, and so the processing of those. And so within the concentrator, you've got these existing mine sites, and I think everybody knows, from the time you find but from the time you're doing your core sample to the time you've got a plant running, you're talking about 20 years. So these existing sites are looking at how do we extend our mine life? How do we lower our operating costs? And that the deeper you go, your grade is dropping, and you're looking at different ways of handling that. And I think one of the ways that people are looking to extend mine life is the reprocessing of material. So we've got tailings dams out there right now with grades that are higher in copper than a lot of facilities are even seeing today as their ore. So we mentioned coarse particle flotation. There's a lot of technologies now that are helpful in addressing some of these types of needs that projects are seeing. And so I think that's kind of a good example where it's, it can be a drive from the tailings ends of things where a client is really needing to address that tailings dam, but then also looking at ways to capitalize on that.
Yeah. Can they make some money while they're actually moving the tailings?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And they use then that money they've made to maybe deposit the tailings in a better way. Maybe they're going to filter it or.
And then has that been successfully implemented? Have you been able to sort of do that whole process yet, or is that sort of still something that's sort of
there are sites that have, and they've had their struggles, and I think just from the beginning of harvesting that material from the existing dam, there's the transport of that, which lends itself very well to a lot of the slurry transport systems that Paterson and Cooke does. Then there's the reprocessing, and then as Todd mentioned, now you've got these other streams that you're now having to deal with, and you've got an existing tailings facility, and where are you depositing the new tailings that you're now producing? And so there's a lot of considerations that need to be made. And so I think where the teams kind of come together is we've got the process knowledge as far as the recovery goes, and then also just the pumping and transport and understanding the deposition of tailings as well, and how to handle that.
Rachel, is there any project that stand out or any application that stands out? This is a good example of what we want to accomplish. We have accomplished or want to accomplish.
Yeah, we had a project in Mexico that's up and running now where they needed to do filtered tailings for mine backfill. And so when they were assessing all the different options of what to do with the surface tailings, it made economic sense for them and also met some of their other goals to, instead of just filtering some of the tailings to make backfill to go underground, they wanted to filter all of their tailings. So what we did for them is we designed and built a hybrid filter plant. So at any given moment, they can choose to either make paste out of the filtered tailings, or they can divert the filtered tailings to stack on surface.
Oh, so they can actually pivot back and forth between the two?
Yeah.
Wow. What is the process for getting that on? I would imagine there's a lot of discussion before they onboard that process. What was that sort of from point A to point B, the discussions initially, like we're going to design this and approving it and everything that goes in between?
I think one of the things that needs to be worked out for any project that's considering that hybrid option is the technology selection. So to make paste backfill, you don't need to have as dry a material, as dry a product as you might need for stacking on surface. So that's, if you were purely just making backfill, you could go with a certain suite of technologies because you're not trying to get as much water out of your tailings.
Right.
Versus if you were just doing surface, you would go with a different suite of technologies. So now you need to decide, okay, what is the optimum sweet spot for this hybrid plant? Because you need to meet both requirements, right? So usually they're going to pick that suite of technologies that gets you the material dry enough to stack on surface.
So in that case, you're looking at the manufacturers basically and then you're sort of piecing it together, or do you end up going with like one manufacturer for that?
So we do all of our dewatering test work ourselves. All of our laboratories in the world are set up to do dewatering technologies for thickening and filtration. And the reason why we do that is we wanted to be completely independent from any of the vendors. So we produce all of the test work parameters needed to select and size equipment, and then we can use that information to go to the different vendors, look at their different technologies, narrow down the field, right? Some technologies are just not suitable for that material, and our test work shows that. Other technologies, you might end up with like 5 technologies that are all feasible. And then we work with the client to look at other aspects, right? The cost, what is the service going to be like once you've installed?
Yeah. What are the service locations? How readily can they get to you? And so just to clarify, though, if you go to those vendors, are you piecing together sometimes? Like if you look at our equipment here, there's probably 30 brands.
Yes. Yeah. So we're always looking for the best piece of equipment for that application, and it's definitely a puzzle.
So you're actually piecing it together.
Yeah.
To wrap up the interview, Todd, I wanted to ask you, you're in an industry that is old as time, for one, but that is really adopting a lot of technology. And it's quite like years ago when I would talk, it's almost sounded like the construction industry, I mean, municipal construction and that was almost ahead of mining. But now because we do a construction show as well, the construction industry is saying we're way behind now. Other industries that like the energy sector, the mining sector, they've just adopted all this technology and all this information, and AI is getting integrated. You drive by a construction site, same old thing. They're just doing it the same way. How do you sort of, as a company, keep that culture of innovation, of drive, of finding people who are willing to safely push the limits? You obviously have to always be, but the industry is demanding innovation, but they are also demanding not to have their bottom line hurt. Really tough. But how do you sort of, from your position as a director, integrate that culture into the company, or how is the company putting that culture in?
Yeah, so that's a great point. As we mentioned earlier, miners are all about managing their risk. They're forced to take some risk because of things that are happening in the world, right? So as Kathy mentioned, head grades are going down. You're starting to have to dig deeper to get the ore bodies that you want to get to.
Regulations are going up.
Regulations are going up for the tailings.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of challenges that the miners are facing. So they have to be innovative, and we have to help them be innovative to do that. And to be able to be a good innovator in any space, I think you need 2 things. A couple of things. You have to be intelligent, right? You have to have the right people with the right intelligence background, the right knowledge. But you also need experience. You have to have experience in these different areas.
Yeah.
And the ability to communicate between these different areas. Like we talked about tailings, we talked about mineral processing. those could be two different companies with different silos and no
Right.
communication that goes on. Whereas at Paterson and Cooke, we really try and foster that communication between the different, don't want to call them silos, but sometimes that's what they end up being, but between the different groups or the different service lines,
Right.
so that we can bring the knowledge from each of the different groups and actually come up with something that's a holistic solution. That's a good thing.
Yeah. I guess from both of your sort of, we'll call them divisions, is that what you feel too? Is it's that importance of being able to sort of cross communicate as you're choosing a vendor, choosing a technology, making recommendations?
Well, exactly. And I mean, Rachel was talking about the project Cozeman, and it's a perfect example of this. You know, when implementing filtered tailings, like, well, which team within Paterson and Cooke has done a lot of filtered tailings? Our backfill team does that as part of almost every project that they have. And so it's something that we've been using for a long time. So getting their input and seeing how, that brings that together. I think, as far as kind of staying on top of, you asked about staying on top of technology and really like maintaining that culture. I think Paterson and Cooke, like Todd mentioned, we have experience, we have passion, but we care a lot about this industry. We've got people right now wandering around SME that are on the board of directors, that are sitting on committees, both in tailings and mineral processing and plant design. So we're working constantly just in all aspects of what we do to really push this industry along. We realize that mining doesn't have the best rap everywhere you go, and people don't love it as an industry, and we work hard to try and change that. And we have people too that come from other backgrounds. I came from biofuels and some of the technologies. You might see that we might have people come from oil and gas or just chemical engineers from other industries. But there's a lot of technologies that are coming into mining that maybe didn't really have a space before. Like the centrifuge comes to mind as one that I always thought, where on earth does this fit in at the tonnages that we're talking about? But we are actually seeing that. We had a client where it made perfect sense for what they're doing. And so I think to stay at the forefront, you have to be at the forefront. And so we are working with universities, like Rachel mentioned. We're at the front of it in all areas, even within SME, trying to understand what are the struggles people are seeing across the board, and how are we addressing those.
Yeah, I mean, Kathy's absolutely right. In the tailing space, we try to be involved in as many committees as possible. In SME, we're involved in the Tailings and Mine Waste Committee, and our goal is to try and influence the industry. We want to push the industry to start adopting new technologies, saving more water, building more stable facilities. And so it's not just, we're not just doing projects for clients and just giving them what they've asked for, right? Like, we're actually trying to shift the industry in the direction that we think is, the best for the future.
Even a few years ago, I've said it many times on the show, a few years ago, the idea of companies coming on and even doing this style, sometimes I think we have an episode that just got 70,000 views or something. And people, they would hear, anything over about 200, people got nervous about, because it's like, who's watching this? Where are they watching? It's all public. It's on YouTube. That has shifted now. We have some of the biggest mine operators now coming on the show and talking, and not talking in general, we want to be part of the community. They're talking about their tailings pond. That's unique. That was not happening 5 years ago. They would not have come on a public show and had that conversation. We're getting the CEOs on. So there is that shift in that knowledge sharing, and, like you're saying, being part of these programs at SME, that's all that's knowledge sharing, but it's also coming more public facing as well. And that will make a big difference to these communities that are, I'm from a community that shut down a mine. And it was a mining town, and they shut down a new mine because somebody got the narrative that it was going to be all dust across the whole town. I looked at their process for managing dust. It was an amazing process. It was not true, but it got legs and it shut it down. I think the mining industry has done a really nice job the last few years. I think there has been a pivot, and it's exciting to see.
Yeah, so, and Rachel mentioned earlier, the Tailings Management Consortium, which is between BHP and Rio Tinto. And then Paterson Cooke is involved there as technology advisors and doing some of the administrative work for them. But they're very interested in how do they move tailings technologies forward. Not just things that are out there that are existing that everybody knows about, but how do they take something that's coming out of a university or a small startup company that doesn't have access to funds or tailings or a place to test their ideas? How do they incubate them and actually get them to move forward so that they can be a productive solution for these miners, not just BHP and Rio Tinto, but for the whole mining industry as a whole?
The other thing that the Tailings Management Consortium is offering to these startup companies or these universities is that they are getting access to the technical specialists within the mining companies themselves. You know, like BHP and Rio Tinto have got very experienced engineers, technologists. So it's an extra layer. They're getting an extra layer of support from technical people within the mining company. The other thing that we're doing is we're actually publishing 2 white papers this year. There's going to be a white paper on tailings stacking and then a white paper on tailings transport and placement methodologies. So that's going to be publicly available to the industry.
And that'll be episode 2 and 3.
Yeah.
When it comes to knowledge sharing, have you seen that affect how these mines are operating? When you're going to talk to them, are you seeing gaps?
We are. You know, we had a site where we were visiting them. We were doing an audit for a cyclone feed pump in their milling circuit. And we, in the process, kind of came to realize, hey, you know, these young guys that are bringing us around the mine that are working here, you know, they don't have a background in mineral processing. And so we actually ended up giving them a mineral processing 101 course, and we brought them through their mill, teaching them all about the fundamentals from crushing all the way through flotation, leaching, and tailings as well. And so we do get engaged with the sites to give them some experience that way. And then, you know, we do see these sites also, you know, I mentioned a lot of sites looking at expanding and looking at adjusting their plant for growth. And, you know, we had a client that, you know, they brought in an engineering firm asking them to help them with their expansion goals. They were looking at increasing throughput by 40%. And you know, look, they had been advised that they were going to need a whole second grinding circuit and grinding line as a part of that. And so that's a significant upgrade for a mine. You know, we came in and with just fundamental mineral processing, we got that plant at their targeted 40% increase 18 months ahead of time with very minimal upgrades. And so part of that was, you know, we were working with this particular client. You know, they didn't have a corporate metallurgist on staff. So, you know, supporting all of their assets that company had. And so, you know, these mid-tier mining companies, a lot of them, they need this like process support and this experience,
Right, yeah.
both in the operations, but then also at the corporate level. It's just lacking. And so trying to support and educate while we're conducting these projects.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I was going to turn this into a debate panel, but you guys were all in agreement, so that didn't work out for me. But
We could go USA versus Canada, but other than that, I don't know.
I mean, you can try again.
We're moving in the right direction, right?
As long as we've got hockey sticks, you're going to have a tough time.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Just don't do any of the other sports. Let's struggle a bit. Thank you, everybody. We'll hope to do it again soon.
All right.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Of course, we'll have a link to Paterson Cooke, as long as the guests are okay with it, a link to each of your LinkedIns if people want to connect. Make sure to follow them on their company LinkedIn as well. Make sure to subscribe to us if you're watching on the Groundsman channel. We will see you on the next episode of Mining Now.